Grip6 manufactures amazing belts, wallets, and wool socks. And did you know they have unlimited replacements for life? Check out their chess-themed merchandise at grip6.com/chess and use code CHESS20 for 20% off your next order.
Hey everybody, it's Grandmaster Ben Finegold here again with the game of the day for Chess.com. We got Alexander Grischuk versus Anish Giri. This is round 13, the penultimate round. There's one round remaining, and lots of exciting games today, so let's get to it. Giri probably was playing for a win the whole game, even though he has black, because he has to get more. He has to get a point more than Nepomniachtchi, because if they tie for first, then Jan wins on tie breaks. So Giri would like to get 2 out of 2, and I guess 1.5 out of 2 might be okay, but might not. So he really has to win. Okay, so they played sort of a, and I said this in another video, my former student Matt Larson plays the Catalan, he plays G3, and this prevents black from playing the Queen's Indian, and that's actually what happened. He played B6, and they got sort of a Queen's Indian, Bogo Indian, Catalan hybrid. Technically, I don't know if I should call this a Queen's Indian, a Bogo Indian, or a Catalan. It's sort of all three. And the difference is in the Catalan, black has played D5 pretty early. It's probably not a Catalan. And in the Queen's Indian, we normally don't go here. So, I don't know. I guess I would call this a Bogo Indian. But, I mean, luckily, that's what Vishy Anand called it on the stream today on Chess.com. So I'm in good company. But it's just a hybrid of the 3 openings. Okay, in this position, Giri chose the 5th most popular move, probably hoping that Grishuk wouldn't be as familiar as the main moves. Grishuk himself has played this move in an earlier game a few years ago. Carlsen has played A5. Taking is the most common move. And Giri played C5. And this is a move that I used to play in the Bogo Indian, although not in this position. In the actual Bogo Indian, where bishop's back here and the bishop's back here. I've played C5, but that was 30 years ago, before Giri was born. Okay, you can castle or take on B4. They're both very common. He took on B4. And White's had this position in games featuring Kasparov and Karpov. Karpov likes to play Queen D3, and these transpose. Sometimes it starts as a Bogo Indian, and then black plays B6, bishop B7. So lots of different move orders. Okay, and this was actually seen in a game a long time ago between Kasparov and Pologaevsky. I think 1977, but it was the early 80s. I don't know why I think it's 77. In 77, Kasparov was 14. So it probably wasn't 77, but if it was, and Kasparov won the game. So that makes me doubt even more it was 77. Okay, maybe that was another game I was looking at. All right, and he played A3, which I like. You don't have to play A3, but okay, knight A6, rook D1. And what's funny is this transposes to a Karpov game that he won. And the most common move is to play knight E1 now. Or I'm sorry, knight F1. And he played knight E1. Knight F1 has been played by Karpov and he won. The knight's going to go to E3 later, and the rook is, not blocked by the knight. And he played knight E1, which is, fine. And in this position, which Karpov has had white in also, everybody before this game played knight takes G2. I found 7 games in my database, and white got 5 wins and 2 losses, no draws, which is very strange because this position's about equal. Maybe white's a little better. So no draws is weird out of 7 games. Small sample size. And to me, I'm not saying this because of what happened in the game, but I mean, king takes makes more sense to me. If you're going to play knight here, you should play knight c2 or knight d3, putting pressure on this pawn. So I'm surprised that king takes g2 has never been played. Even if knight takes is better, king takes is reasonable. I always look at the game with 4 engines to see if they agree, and they don't. But here they do agree. They all play king takes g2. And that's what Grischuk played. Now, I'm not saying that white's better, but I'm just surprised a natural move like that has never been played. Okay, so h5. And this is what the engines and the super GMs are doing nowadays. They're pushing their h-pawns, so that way Ginger GM is happy. And when Anand was on the live show today on Chess.com with Danny Wrench, and I can't believe I forget names a lot. Robert Hess. I've been friends with Robert Hess for 15 years, and his name blanked out on me. They were like, yeah, this is the way people play now. It's weird, but that's what's happening. And then when Anand came on, he said, I mean, people play like this, but not here. That doesn't make any sense. It's gonna bite them later. It weakens g5. This isn't really serious. So Anand really disliked this move. I mean, it's not that bad, but it's probably misplaced here. Probably moving the rook to the open file is a more sensible move. Okay, knight c2, forcing the pawn to capture. Okay, and now this knight's just bad. I mean, it can't go here, it can't go here, and this pawn is backward and weak. So anybody would want to have white here. Rook b8. Some of the engines liked this move. That's why I'm not an engine. I mean, I would never play this move over this move. Why would you want your rook trapped on a8? All right, I don't know. Okay, so he played the human move. He's human. And e4 was panned by most of the commentators. They didn't like this move. The engine doesn't say it's the best move, but I mean, I don't know, d4, e4, c4, looks good to me. Okay, I like that move. And e5 is the move that makes sense. Black wants to play knight c5. And once this pawn is gone, you can do it. Maybe that's why people didn't like e4, because that really lets black get his knight to c5. If he had played e3 later after e5, then the knight's still stranded on a6. The other reason not to like e4, if you don't like it, is potentially that pawn can get attacked. So it's just it's sort of out there. Okay. He played queen d3, which defends all of his pawns and gets his queen out of the way so the rook can do stuff. Yeah, knight c7, I'm not a fan of, but it worked out okay. He could just take and play knight c5, or he could move his rook into the game. But he wanted to play knight e6, and he did. That was okay. Okay, rook b5. It's funny, Anand said something very funny on the stream, the live stream on Chess.com with Danny and Robert. And I was like, man, that sounds like me. He said he suggested rook b5 before it was played, and they were analyzing it a little. Then when Grishuk played it, he's like, I don't like that. He's like, I know I suggested it. And I was thinking, yeah, I do that. I suggest moves, and then like 2 minutes later, I'm like, yeah, I don't like that. Okay, but the move's fine. And again, white's a little bit better. White has more space. This is a backward pawn. I'm not sure why that's there, but all right. Still in the drawing zone. Rook e8 surprised everybody. And I think it's not the best move. Black should play either h4 or take on d4 to get the c5 square. And it's in the realm of equality. Probably white's still a little better. The point of this move is to put pressure on e4 in situations where these pawns are traded. And this is a pawn sacrifice. I mean, he could take the pawn on e5, which he decided not to do. Black has tons of compensation. Weak pawn, weak pawn, weak pawn. The knight has c5. The rook is on a weird square. The d file can now be taken over by black. Knight g4 harasses the rook later. It's weird to have the rook on e5. So I think Grischuk correctly didn't take that pawn. He played h4, stopping h4 forever. And the thing is, I can go to the g5 square later. If you ever go to the g4 square, I can kick you out. So, white's still better here. g6, not the best move, I don't think, but it's okay. Super GMs like to keep the tension and not necessarily do stuff and change the position and make it worse. Black's position's, perfectly fine. Okay, f3, never play. No. And then that stops the knight from going to g4 forever, and more importantly, it protects the e pawn. Okay, and he played knight d7, which is fine. As soon as this d pawn is gone, either by d5 or takes, the knights are going to have great squares. Knight f1, and in this position, both sides have played pretty well, I would say. Maybe Grishuk's played a little better, maybe, but it should be a draw. And the engine wants to play g5, and that's not the move you want to play after knight f1, because you're really worried about giving away the f5 square. So probably if you let the engine sit for a long time, which we don't really have the luxury of doing, it'll decide that g5 is not the best. It's very risky to give up f5. On the other hand, white's king could potentially get open, so it might cause Grishuk some problems. But yeah, probably g5, if you let the engine think long enough, is just going to be bad. And he took on d4, which is reasonable. Take on d4, and now the knights have these really good squares on e5 and c5, and the pawns are weak. The problem is Giri really wants to win, because if he draws, he's not going to win the tournament and needs to win the tournament. So he's got to play a little risky to, have a chance of playing Magnus at the end of the year. Okay, he played knight e5, queen e2, and pretty good game so far. And unfortunately, especially for his fans, but for the excitement of the tournament also, Giri, as Wang Hao would say, started playing like a 2200. I don't think Giri would say that, but that was a funny quote by Wang Hao in the game that he lost to Nepomniachtchi. Okay, so very good play by both sides, very tense game, very complicated. Either side could win. All three results are possible. White is to be preferred because there's two weak pawns. The knight can get to d5. And, white's pieces are all good. And here he just totally collapsed. Knight takes d4, not the best move. And here he played a very bad move. He needed to put probably a rook on the c line, rook e8, and then play rook c5. Probably still in the drawing zone, but, worse. And he played knight c6, which is not only a bad move, but it's a worse plan. There's a reason why he played knight c6, and it was a bad reason. The knight's just better on e5, and you want the c-file half open so you can attack the weak pawn. This blocks the c-file. Rook d2 is more accurate than rook d1 because it defends the queen, but it doesn't make a big difference. Queen e6, knight e3. And again, black's knight belongs on e5, and he played knight e7, which is not a good move. And here, black is losing, and Giri, I think, realized he was losing. His d pawn's weak, his b pawn's weak. I can play knight d5 whenever I want, and you really can't save a pawn here. You're actually going to lose a pawn by force. I'm going to take this pawn. If you play this rook, I'm going to take that. It's basically unspeakable to play knight c8. You just can't play chess like that. It probably wasn't even considered because you can't have your knight on the back row disconnecting your rooks to defend weak pawns. That's just not a way to play chess. That's just going to lose in the long run because you're letting the guy have the greatest knight ever and you have the worst knight ever. And his rooks are better than yours. Your pawns are weaker. Yeah. So the only move that makes any sense is rook here, and then rook b1 just wins this pawn. Again, unless he wants to play this terrible move, knight c8. So the engine already says that white's winning, and so Giri did something wrong that I do a lot. which is, okay, I'm losing, so rawr, let's play crazy. And sometimes when I do that, I'm not losing, and then I am when I play crazy. F5, and all the commentators were shocked because it's such a bad move. So it's desperation. He's trying to hope that in his mild time trouble, Grischuk starts thinking or something. I don't know. But the problem with that move is everything wins. This wins, and it's not even clear which move wins more. It's just a terrible move. Weakens the king, weakens g6, hangs a pawn. White has everything on f5, so it's just hopeless. Queen takes d6. And what's funny is the rest of the game, Grischuk probably had more incisive ways to win, but he played the simplest way, where black has no counterplay and no chance. So instead of being like plus 11, he's plus 7, which playing the safest way where you're completely winning, that's the mark of a super GM. He played knight c6, which is also not a good move. And then after this is a brilliant move. Every move wins, but this is actually great. And the only reason you wouldn't play that is you're hanging your knight. And after queen g6, it doesn't matter if you play king f8 or king h8. Doesn't matter, but I'll play one. f6, threatening queen g7 mate, and rook takes h5. And if you go here, it doesn't matter if you take the rook, you're getting mated. And then you just keep checking, hoping to check forever. You play g4, and then the engine plays queen g4, hanging the queen. And if you play the move hg4, king g3, and no more checks for you, unless you want to lose your queen. But you still get mated. I'm threatening checkmate, and giving your queen away just staves it off for a move. So it's mate in 3 here. So he can't take the knight on e3 because he gets mated. So he took back, and then they traded queens. And not only is black 2 pawns down, I wouldn't say for nothing. I would say white has 2 pawns and he's better. If you put 2 random pawns on the board for black, white's still better. This is really weak. This is really weak. This is a great knight. These are great rooks. White has everything and 2 extra pawns. So the stronger your engine is and the more you let it think about the position, the higher the number goes. And one of my engines said plus 11, even though white's just 2 pawns up. So that's, Okay, and again, you could play complicated with c5, which is the engine move. And Grischuk always played the simplest move, where, black has nothing. Now, if you trade rooks, the knight's defending the pawn, the knight's under attack, and there's a skewer, and you're up 2 pawns. So he tried to keep pieces on the board. And again, you could play other moves, but rook d4 is the simplest. It defends the pawn, the rook's on the knight, the rook has e4, knight d6. This rook is terrible, but has to defend the pawn. Knight c6, rook d2, stopping check. Rook d7 is the engine move and the human move, but he's like, you can't get any counterplay ever. You got nothing. And then rook d5, no counterplay. If you move your rook and I play king f2, there's black can never do anything. So he traded rooks, which surprised the commentators. Didn't really surprise me, because at least he has 2-1 on the queen side now. Obviously he's losing, but you have to choose which is the least losing. Knight d6 is excellent. It stops knight c4, and it stops b5. And it stops king here. Great move. And then, black's just down 2 pawns for nothing. Nothing. And white's going to have a lot of passed pawns. And okay, he's just not resigning because it's, he's trying to win the candidates. He would have resigned if it was some random tournament. And there's basically nothing to play for. And he resigned here. He's down 2 pawns. White's going to have 2 or 3 passed pawns. And, it's unstoppable. Black doesn't have any counterplay. So excellent game by Grischuk. Giri played pretty well, as I like to say, until he didn't. He really faded at the end. And it's tremendous pressure. Your whole life changes if you become the world champion. And a lot of people who are watching on the internet, like you think well, these are super GMs and they're great. And they don't feel the pressure like I would. Yes, they do. You know how important the game is, and it's really hard to play. For Grischuk, it wasn't as important. He can't win the tournament anyway, and he has white, and he knows his opponent feels pressure. So Giri's having a great second half, and unfortunately for him, that ends his chances. Pomniachtchi drew his game, and he's the winner of the tournament. He's going to play Magnus November, December. So congratulations to Jan. Anish played really well. It was a really exciting round. All the games were exciting, but unfortunately, Grishuk just played better. So I hope you enjoyed that game. I hope you enjoy the live coverage on Chess.com's YouTube and Twitch pages. Today they had Robert Hess, Danny Wrench, Vishy Anand, and special guest Bruce Pandolfini, who was Fabiano's first coach, and also is important in the chess world. So keep following the live coverage. Tomorrow's the last round. Unfortunately, some of the games might end quickly. Maybe. This is Grandmaster Ben Finegold for Chess.com. Please like and subscribe, and please follow the coverage. Watch all the videos we make, and I'll see you guys later. Bye, everyone.